the time was when an apprentice would take up the trade of woodworking, the first thing he was taught was how to make his own tools. And usually, one of the first things he began making were planes, because they are dead simple. Now what I have here is a little finger plane. It's made out of brass and wood and steel, and as you can see, it's none too complex. There's two sides made out of brass. Let me take the wedge and the iron out. There's the iron. There's the locking wedge that holds the iron. And there is a triangle of wood back here. You can see it in this part that hasn't been done yet. A triangle of wood called the frog that holds the iron. A finger rest right here, and a wedge pin in between to hold the wedge. Nothing to it really. Very simple to make. Now I don't, it takes several hours to put one of these together, and of course we don't have that kind of time here, but I am going to show you each and every step in making one of these so that you can make your own. You want to start by selecting a good dense wood to make it out of. Something like ebony is fine. Wenge is another one that's used a lot. Rosewood. I chose cocobola mainly because it's so colorful, and I just happen to have a big chunk of it. Took a strip like this and cut out the three pieces from this strip that I needed. This is the frog, of course. It's just a triangle of wood. This is the finger rest, and it's T-shaped. Notice that the sides fit in there, like so. And then this little rectangle of wood will become the wedge when we need it. Now, all of this can be cut out on the bandsaw, including the brass sides. What you need to do when, let's go move over to the bandsaw right now. What you need to do when cutting on the bandsaw, the first thing you need is you need the right blade. The blade that we chose here has as many teeth as we could get. That's not necessarily for wood cutting, of course, but it is very good for this because it's a good both metal or non-ferrous metal and wood blade. It cuts a little bit slower, but it will cut both materials. Now, I'm about to cut here one of the sides. Now, I've already taken this piece of brass and I've cut it in a strip. I've already drilled the hole for the wedge pin. That's 1/8 inch hole. And now I'm just going to cut the shape of the side. The piece is so small that it's a little bit delicate to keep my fingers away. It's hard to keep my fingers away from the blade. So I've attached the brass to a small a scrap of MDF, and I'll be cutting both at once. I just used a piece of carpet tape to hold that. Finally, you'll notice that there's a piece of plywood here. This serves as a zero clearance table. A lot of these pieces that we make, I mean, look at how small some of these things are. A lot of pieces that we make would drop right down through the table insert if it weren't for this piece of plywood. So let's do a little cutting here. I'm going to get as little clearance as possible and just take my time through the brass. much to it. Now I might use the other end of that that same scrap to do the other side. That done, once you have two sides, you need to make sure that they are exactly the same. So you need to do a little work here. I had a brass pin here, and I'm going to cut another one and show you a little bit about cutting this brass. Hang on a minute. Chasing a dog around the bench. In cutting this brass, I found that there's two tools that work really nice. The first is just a little microfile. In order to cut the brass to the side, I knew I'm going to mark it with the microfile, and now I could just keep on cutting in that groove, and it doesn't take too long. Eventually, I'd get through. It would take about a minute to cut that 1/8 inch piece of brass. This is a much quicker way. This is a Dremel tool, and I've got a metal cutoff blade. It's a composite fiberglass and abrasive, and it cuts through it like right now. There we go. Now I'm going to go over here on the strip sander and clean up the ends of this a little bit. Now, I'm going to take the two sides that I have, insert the brass pin through them, both of them. They are actually pretty close, right as they are. I'm going to clamp them together with a pair of vice grips. There we go. Now, over here on the opposite side of the strip sander, I've mounted a 2-inch drum sander, and I'm going to use this to sand the top surfaces of the sides so that they're the same. Doesn't take much as long as you're careful with cutting on the bandsaw. Now let's go over here and we'll touch up the nose. Make sure that's the same. Then I'm going to switch positions with the vice grips and sand the bottoms. Go. Now I'm not going to worry about the back, and the reason for the back is because this will get sanded on a much later time. But there you can see that the two sides now match perfectly, and that the hole for the pin is perfectly positioned in both. Now, while this is a little warm, and before I go on to the next thing that I have to do with these, I'm going to let those sit there apart and cool down, and go over here and I'll show you how to make the iron. Now, you need a good tool steel for the iron. You could make it out of a jointer, an old jointer blade if you have one. The problem with using a Shopsmith jointer blade, however, is that they're kind of wedge-shaped, and that gets in the way. If you have old jointer blades from another jointer, those might work. What I chose to do was go out and buy some stock from a cutoff tool. This is sold by any mail order company that specializes in metalworking tools. These cutoff tools are used, just like it sounds, to cut off pieces of metal on a metalworking lathe. They're extremely hard. They make very, very good plane irons. In fact, cutting tools or chisels of all sorts. And the only drawback is that they're pretty tough to cut. This, by the way, is 3/32 of an inch thick and 5/8 of an inch wide. You can get them all the way from half an inch on up to a full inch in width. Fortunately, they can be cut fairly easily with that same composite cutoff wheel that I showed you on the Dremel. I'm going to hold this here and then use the Dremel. I've already partially cut this through, and I'll use the Dremel to finish the cut. How I started the cut, first of all, was to score it across the blade with the Dremel, and then go in from one side and then in from the other. I'll now finish this off. There we go. That was about how long it took to cut through about a 1/4 inch of this stock. It really doesn't take a whole lot. Now, what we need to do next is square up the ends and then put a rough bevel on here. We're going to put a 30-degree bevel on that. Yes, I know, Libby. We're going to put a 30-degree bevel on this. The frog beds the plane iron at 35 degrees. A 30-degree tool angle will give us 5 degrees of clearance on the back side, which we're going to need. Now let's see. Once again, I need the vice grips to hold the blade. I'm going to need a protractor and a pencil. Okay, I've got the protractor set at 30 degrees, and I'm going to put that against the backstop of the strip sander, and I'm going to mark a line at 30 degrees here on the table. This will help me to grind a 30-degree angle on this. Now, as I told you, this is a rough angle. It's not meant to be our final cutting edge. moving so slow. I'm using this at a very slow speed, and I don't have any chance of burning this, but I do want to not to draw a color. The color that you're seeing right there is actually from the dye I put on there when I marked my cut. But there's a rough 30-degree angle on that. It's hot, so I'm going to let it cool. We'll go back over here to our brass sides. Now, when you put your finger in between these brass sides, you don't want to feel these sharp edges. So we're going to take the drum sander and we're going to relieve them. I'm going to sand over the edges, all right, and then but I'm not going to sand at the very corner. The corner, remember, fits up against this T-shaped piece of wood right here, and we want that to fit in there fairly tight. So I'll start here and sand down to the corner, but not the corner. Now, I've got a good bevel in there, so I'm going to begin rolling this brass side back and forth to create a nice little round there, or a little round over on that edge. Now this edge, remember, this one has to be the mirror image of the other. Take very long. Now, long tool, and this tool. Before we can go too much farther, we'll need to clean up the insides of those brass sides. The reason for that is that once you get this plane assembled, you don't want to work around that pin, and it'll be very difficult to work around the pin in order to polish. So we're going to do a little bit of polishing right now. These are what are called Flutter Sheets. Or a flap sander would also do. Now you'll probably notice that from time to time I've got my fingers in those Flutter Sheets that aren't going very fast, so it doesn't hurt too much. But if I didn't want to touch them at all, this is a little trick you can try. It's a piece of wood with a bit of carpet tape on the end. I'm going to take this carpet tape and I'm going to stick. This is pressure sensitive, so I'm applying a bit of pressure here. I'm going to stick that brass to it, and then do the same thing. Now, I have to be careful because as this brass warms up, the carpet tape will let go. So I don't want to press too hard to get it too warm. In fact, what I would really should be doing is working with some water nearby that I can dip this in from time to time. It wouldn't affect the carpet tape that much. Now there we go. That's starting to get shiny. I'm going to switch from these Flutter Sheets, which are about 120 grit, to this abrasive brush. These are nylon bristles with abrasives in them, and this is very fine stuff, about 600 grit. And I'm going to go ahead and clean this. nice, I'll try to reflect some light there, put a nice shine on that. And we could, yeah, see that polish? Woo! You could go on further from this with a little bit of jeweler's rouge. With a little bit of jeweler's rouge, you can get that to where you can shave in it. But I'm going to stop right there for right now. And let's go over here to the bench again. Now, we need to take these two sides. I need the pin and the finger rest. Put the pin through the hole. Put the finger rest in place. Now, before we can assemble this with the frog, there's a little work to do on both the frog and the finger rest. That frog has got to have a perfectly flat surface here. This is the surface that holds up the plane iron. And if I put the plane iron in place right now, okay, I can see some daylight right there. This was cut on the bandsaw, so we need to clean that up. We're going to clean it up over here on the strip sander. By the way, I'm using 80 grit for all of this. Been doing from the start there is keeping that dust collection on. If I didn't mention this at the beginning, but certain of these oily resinous tropical woods are toxic. In fact, I put a chart of toxic woods on the blackboard for you to download, just because of I'm working with Coco Bolo here. This can be a wood that causes some medical problems if you inhale the dust, as you'll see on that chart. Same way with several of the rosewood family. Even something as innocent as walnut can have some deleterious effects. So we've got a perfectly flat frog now. Now there is a in this finger rest, you want a divot to for your finger to rest in. There are two ways to do this divot. This is a simple nosing bit, a router bit that will cut a round flute, and you can put this in your drill press. Crank your drill press up to a high speed and put a little divot in there just like this. We've already done that. I would suggest that if you do that, though, you get a small hand screw clamp. This is, let's see if we've got a small one here. We do. Gonna need a small one under there. There we go. Once again, this is just on the order of keeping your fingers out of harm's way. The router bit whirling around can be something real nasty if it gets a hold of you, but you clamp this in between these the jaws of this hand screw, and then do your drilling, being able to hold on to the hand screw. Much easier to control that way. Another way to do the divot, if you don't have a nosing bit or a fluting bit, is to use a small drum sink. I'm going from a 2-inch to a 1/2 inch here, and this is a little technique that Drew developed. It's really ingenious, because not only can you scoop out this little finger divot, but you can shape it and make it oblong or any shape that you want. All you do is put this on here and roll the piece over the side. See that? Now see, when I made that divot, it was a little off center, and I was able to work this back to where it's now centered with by using that little technique. You could also, you don't have to start the divot with a router bit. You can start it right here on this neat little drum sander. Once you've got this divot made, you want to clean that up with a little sandpaper. This Cocobolo sands really nicely, and you can sand it to a fine sheen. Now, we've got the divot in the finger rest. The frog is nice and straight. The next thing that we need to do is to drill a few holes in the sides, and you want these holes are going to be for brass pins that go through the plane and hold it together. What you need is a punch, and simply punch 2 holes, or punch two markings for holes in the nose. Those markings are on a line, and they're about a quarter of an inch apart. And then where the frog hits, punch 2 more holes that follow the hypotenuse of the frog. Now, I'm going to switch from these set of props to this set of props in future time, because I've now drilled the one side with the holes that are needed to assemble this. You can do the drills, or drill these, of course, on the drill press, or you can actually use the drill in the horizontal boring mode, just as it is over there. If you're doing a production run of planes, as apparently I am doing right here, you may want to just stay in the horizontal boring mode and make these holes in the brass. You only need to drill one side, not the other. The other holes happen later on. Now, you want to position your frog and your finger rest so there is about a 1/4 inch gap between the two. If you take your plane iron, and did I put that? There it is. The rough plane iron, and put that on the frog. Okay, holding that against the bench, and then you put the finger rest. There should be a tiny gap somewhere between a 1/16 and an 1/8 of an inch between the cutting edge of the plane iron and the back end of the finger rest. The closer you actually get the finger rest to the cutting edge of the plane iron, the smoother the cut is going to be. So when you find that spot, and I already did on this group, you mark the wedge where it goes. The next thing you need to do is to take your wooden pieces and a scratch awl and scratch some scratch marks in the edges that are going to get glued up. And there's a good reason for this. Cocobolo is an extremely oily wood, and because of that, you need to give it some way to make a mechanical purchase, because the glue is just not going to bond with the wood fibers. There's so much oil in it. I also put some scratches in the brass. Probably not necessary, but hey, it could be. Now I'm going to put together the brass and set my clamp. That's set. Let's take a little bit of CA glue here. Now, this glue is only to hold this temporarily. It's going to be riveted together with some brass pins here in a minute, and so you only need this glue to hold it really while you're drilling the holes for the pins. Let me squeeze that together. There we go. And get a clamp on that to hold it. Of course, this is CA glue, so this is going to take no time at all to dry. Nonetheless, little clamping never hurts. Check and see that the bottom of the frog and the finger rest are even with the wood, and they are. And probably set that aside for 15 minutes, and when you get it back, it will look like this. Now, the next step is to take the holes on one side and drill them all the way through your cocobolo and out the other side. You want to be able to insert these brass pins in these holes. Now, I went and I bought some stock from the 1/16 inch bin at the local hardware store, and found when I got it back that it really wasn't a 1/16 of an inch. This measures 0.071. This one measures 0.080. So you're going to have to remember this when you choose your drilling apparatus, because if I were to drill a hole for this brass pin with a 1/16 of an inch of a bit, a 1/16 inch bit, it wouldn't cut it. You couldn't insert the pin. Actually, what I had to do for this one and this one is go to my American wire gauge set of bits, and a number 49 bit is 0.0703. So that's what I used to poke these holes. Now, once I've got the holes, I'm going to insert my rivet stock through the brass, let it protrude about a 1/64 of an inch out, and take my cutoff wheel or the file, either one, doesn't matter, and cut this off. Okay. Now I'm going to take that pin out, go over here to the strip sander, and really quickly make sure that I've got two flat ends. I don't want to grind too much away, because when I put this pin in here, I want it to protrude a little bit on each side, about a 1/64 of an inch. Now, I've got a piece of iron here onto which we've welded some handles, so it serves as an anvil. Nice thing to have. If you don't have one, don't worry, just any chunk of iron will do. Let me straighten up my working area here a little bit. Now, what I'm going to do is put this put the plane, the assembled plane, on the iron, press it down tight, and tap with a hammer. This is a Warrington hammer, but you could use a ball peen or any small hammer. As I'm tapping, I'm beginning to peen over the brass on both sides. Okay? It's peening over here and peening over here. Now, that's making the brass fat, and it's wedging in those holes. If I wanted to get it to wedge even more, okay, I could take a countersink and ream out those holes a little bit, creating a little bit of a divot, and then when I peen the brass, it would fill the divot. Okay, that's good. Let's do one more. Where'd my brass pin stop go? All right, we'll go on to this one. Sometimes it's a little bit difficult to get this through. Get started here. And when that happens, you can cut it off. And tap it through. Now, you want to also be careful when you're doing this last rivet, the last rivet that's closest to the front of the finger rest. Depending on how you shape the finger rest, this last rivet may actually, if you drill it all the way through, you might the hole might come out in the divoted portion of the finger rest. That was the case for this right here. This is the plane that I made. So what I did for the front pivot rivets instead was I cut them off. I just made them very short, just so that they protruded into the finger rest, maybe 1/8 of an inch. And I took my cutoff wheel and I put some notches in them. Put some CA glue on them and press them in place. You do need at least 2 rivets on each of these pieces, both the frog and the finger rest, to hold it in place. Now this is just a hair long. It looks like. I'm going to go over here to the sander and make it a little shorter. And then do the same thing that I did before. Just I'm not hammering. I'm actually just pounding or tapping very lightly. Now, you can also use a flat-ended pin punch to do this. That may actually be better, especially when you're pounding here close to the wood. You don't want to hit the wood. Okay, that's good. Takes patience. Now, the last thing we're going to do is put the pin in place exactly the same way. I'm going to go over here and I'm going to make 2 flat ends on the pin. I'm going to take my countersink and I'm going to open up that hole a little bit so that when the brass flares out, it will fill it. Now the neat thing about this is you'll see in a minute when we sand down these rivets, you won't even see them. Hitting a little harder because it's a bigger piece of brass. That. All right. Now, let's go over and do some shaping on the strip sander. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to sand down all those rivets so this thing doesn't look like it was put together in Frankenstein's laboratory. You have to look really hard to see those rivets. Really, really hard. Try to catch it. Try to get some light. So there you go. You can see somewhat. We're going to polish this even more, and it is going. Those things will slowly disappear. Okay, the last step on shaping the body of the plane is to sand over the front. We're going to round these edges here. And the back. Got the back. Now I'd actually do some thanks. Hang on. Sorry. I'd actually do some more shaping on this. I haven't got the back to where I want it, but I don't want you to get too bored. This is a long segment. So the next thing to do is to sand the bottom. Make sure that the brass and the wood are perfectly flush. Okay, back over to the bench. And we're going to fit the iron and the wedge. Now I'm going to just go ahead. At this point, you would probably want to put a sharp point on your iron. Remember, we just roughed it in here. But at this juncture, it would be best to actually grind this down to where you want it and put the beginnings of a cutting edge on here. Simply because you want to be able to make sure that there is enough clearance here on the bottom. This iron should not come out and hit the frog, and it doesn't. This is actually put together pretty well. But we also need to make sure that the wedge is going to fit in there, and the wedge should fit down and there be no clearance, and there isn't. Now, I'm going to take this over and we're going to sand a bevel on this wedge, and we're going to fit it in such a way, and this is the hardest part of this whole operation. We've got to fit the bevel and the wedge so that when the wedge is pushed into place, it comes down almost to the cutting edge, maybe a 32nd of an inch before the front of the cutting edge, and that way it serves as a chip breaker when you're cutting. Helps roll up those nice tight little curls, and it also has to make contact all the way across the bar. If you take a look at the wedge from the plane that I finished, you'll see that there is a line here of compressed wood fibers that goes from one side to the other. That wedge actually makes contact with the wedge pin all the way across there, so that it puts the maximum pressure on the blade and keeps it where it's supposed to be. So let's go over here and do a rough fitting. Now, once again, I'm not going to have time to do this entirely, but at least you can begin to see what's happening here. Bevel on this, and it needs just a little off the sides. If I slide that in, actually, that's a pretty nice fit. If you were to come in tight, you would see that the end of this is maybe 1/8 of an inch away from the end of the iron. If I were to take just a little bit more off of this, make this wedge just a little bit steeper. I'm going to push in at the bottom to make the angle steeper. At this point, I really need a zero clearance insert for the strip sander. And pushing that home, there we go. We're about maybe a 32nd of an inch away from the cutting edge. So this wedge is fit pretty nicely, just as it is. Okay, I would be happy with that. Once you've got that done, you want to put your final edge on your plane iron. Now, I know that that's one of the most important parts, but I have actually already shown you exactly how to do it in sawdust session number 10. If you go there, you'll see just how to use that strip sander to put a really, really nice edge on this. So the last thing you need to know is, all right, how do I make it cut? Very simple. Put your plane iron in. I'm holding this flat on the surface of my bench. Okay. Put the wedge in. Okay. Push it down until it's snug but not real tight, and pull back on the iron. Back it out maybe a 1/16 of an inch. Now push the wedge all the way home. Okay. Shouldn't be any more than thumb tight. Some people I know like to whack on it with a hammer, but I never do. I feel that is not what God intended wedges for. Now we're going to tap the iron in until it just begins. Yeah, what do you think? Look at that. Pretty neat, huh? Pretty neat. Cool. We're going to tap that iron in until it is just protruding. I can feel it along the edge, and then we're going to take a cut. No, not there yet. Not there yet. Now I'm going to tighten up the wedge a little bit more, because that sometimes draws the iron in, and it did. There we go. Look at that. Look at that. Paper thin curls. Isn't that cool? Isn't that cool? You betcha. Okay. And at that point, it's just sanding and finishing. Now, the thing I like about the Coppola is this needs no finish other than wax. Yeah, we'll go. It needs no finish other than wax. It's a sort of a self-finishing wood with all the oils that it's got in it. The brass, I lapped the brass at with jeweler's rouge, and then I think Drew attacked it with some 15,000 grit sandpaper that we've got around here for some reason, and you can just about shave in the side. So you can make this as nice and soft finished as you want. And really, the softer the finish gets, the nicer it feels in your hands. And with the nicer it feels, the more you'll want to use it. And this is just absolutely cutting perfect curls. There you go. And that's how to make a finger plane.